They thought she was just a simple cleaner, until she threw a $400 million secret right onto their boardroom table. Watch until the end to see how one ignored woman completely destroyed a billionaire's empire. The first time Evelyn Carter walked into the executive boardroom, nobody bothered to stop talking. That was the mistake. She stood quietly near the back wall, holding a cardboard box filled with old maintenance reports, wearing a faded navy cardigan, simple black trousers, and the kind of worn shoes nobody in the room would ever remember. Around the enormous walnut table sat 12 of the most powerful people in the city. Lawyers. Investors. Executives. Bankers. Men and women who had spent decades learning how to recognize money, influence, and authority. And none of them recognized Evelyn. To them, she was just the woman who cleaned their offices. The woman who emptied their trash. The woman who replaced their coffee. The woman they walked past every morning without ever learning her name. At the head of the table sat Richard Blackwell, the CEO of Blackwell Meridian Holdings, a man famous for turning struggling companies into billion-dollar empires. He glanced toward Evelyn and frowned. "Excuse me," he said sharply. "This meeting is private." Evelyn didn't move. "I'm aware." A few executives exchanged uncomfortable looks. Richard pointed toward the door. "Then you should leave." Evelyn looked down at the cardboard box in her hands. Then she looked directly at him. "I think you should hear what's inside this box first." The room became silent. Richard gave a short laugh. "You're a cleaner." Evelyn nodded. "I am. So unless you're here to clean the table, I suggest you go." Nobody knew that Evelyn had spent the previous 14 years watching Blackwell Meridian from the shadows. Nobody knew that she had read every financial report, every acquisition document, every engineering proposal, and every failed investment the company had made. Nobody knew that the woman they had ignored for years had once built something that could change the entire company. And nobody knew the real reason she had chosen to hide. If stories about underestimated people who quietly discover their own strength mean something to you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Silent Empire, and stay with us until the end, because sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one who understands the truth better than anyone in the room. 3 weeks earlier, Evelyn had been invisible. She arrived at Blackwell Meridian every morning at 5:30. Before the executives. Before the assistants. Before the lawyers. Before the lights in the upper floors were switched on. She knew which elevators made strange noises. Which conference rooms had broken air conditioning. Which executives preferred black coffee. Which employees stayed late because they were afraid to go home. She knew things because invisible people saw everything. But most importantly, Evelyn knew numbers. She had always known numbers. As a child, she could calculate percentages before she could properly spell them. Her father had been an accountant. Her mother had been a mathematics teacher. They hadn't been wealthy. They lived in a small house outside Richmond, Virginia, where the heating failed every winter and the kitchen table doubled as her father's desk. But Evelyn had grown up believing that intelligence wasn't something you displayed. It was something you used. Her father used to tell her something she never forgot. Never confuse being unnoticed with being powerless. Those words stayed with her long after he was gone. When Evelyn was 26, she had developed a revolutionary logistics model that could dramatically reduce shipping waste for large manufacturing companies. She had spent years developing it. She built the formulas herself. She tested them. She refined them. And eventually, she presented the idea to a technology firm where she worked as a junior analyst. The company loved the concept. But they didn't love Evelyn. Her manager took the presentation. He removed her name. He presented the system to the board as his own. 6 months later, he became vice president. Evelyn received a small severance package and a warning not to discuss what had happened. She could have fought. She had emails. She had timestamps. She had copies of everything. But that same month, her father suffered a stroke. Medical bills arrived faster than she could pay them. Her mother was already struggling. Evelyn made a decision. She stopped fighting for recognition. And she started surviving. Years passed. Eventually, she found work at Blackwell Meridian. Not as an analyst. Not as an engineer. Not as an executive. As a cleaning supervisor. It wasn't what she had dreamed of. But it paid the bills. And it gave her something else. Access. For 14 years, Evelyn watched. She watched executives celebrate acquisitions that would eventually fail. She watched managers fire talented employees because they were too proud to admit mistakes. She watched Richard Blackwell build an empire around one philosophy. Never admit weakness. Never apologize. Never let anyone see you uncertain. Richard was brilliant. But Evelyn noticed something he didn't. His company was slowly breaking underneath him. The warning signs were everywhere. A logistics division was losing money. A major European expansion was burning through cash. A manufacturing partnership was quietly collapsing. And one particular acquisition was about to become catastrophic. Evelyn knew because she had found something buried inside an old report. Something nobody else had noticed. A recurring error in the company's inventory projections. A tiny discrepancy. Less than 1%. Almost invisible. But repeated across hundreds of shipments, it became millions of dollars. Evelyn spent 6 months studying it. She wasn't trying to expose anyone. She wasn't trying to become famous. She simply wanted to understand. Then, one Tuesday morning, she realized the problem was much bigger than she thought. Blackwell Meridian wasn't losing millions. It was heading toward a collapse that could cost the company nearly $400 million. And the board meeting that morning was about to approve the exact acquisition that would trigger it. That was why Evelyn entered the boardroom. Not for revenge. Not for recognition. Because she knew what was coming. Richard stared at her. "You're wasting everyone's time." Evelyn slowly placed the cardboard box on the table. "I don't think I am." One of the executives laughed. "Richard, is this some kind of joke?" Richard's face tightened. "No." He looked at Evelyn. "This is an employee who has apparently forgotten her position." Evelyn didn't react. She opened the box. Inside were 14 years of reports. Handwritten notes. Printed spreadsheets. Copies of internal documents. And dozens of pages covered in calculations. Richard looked at them dismissively. "What exactly do you think you've discovered?" Evelyn pulled out one sheet. "Your Meridian Freight acquisition is based on incorrect inventory projections." The room went still. Richard stared at her. "Who told you that?" "No one." "Then how do you know?" "I calculated it." Richard smiled. "You cleaned our offices." "I still do." "You're telling me you've somehow found an error our financial team missed?" "Yes." A lawyer leaned forward. "That's an extraordinary claim." Evelyn nodded. "So is approving a $400 million liability without checking the underlying numbers." The room erupted. People started talking over one another. Richard slammed his hand on the table. "Enough." Everyone stopped. He looked at Evelyn. "You have no authority to challenge this board." Evelyn's voice remained calm. "No." She paused. "But the numbers don't care who has authority." That sentence stayed in the room. Richard's expression hardened. "You have 5 minutes." Evelyn nodded. "That's enough." She began explaining. One number. Then another. Then another. She showed how the inventory system was double-counting regional transfers. How the error had been hidden by quarterly averaging. How the acquisition's projected profit had been artificially inflated. And how, once the acquisition was completed, the company would inherit liabilities that could not be recovered. The CFO interrupted. That can't be right. Evelyn slid a page toward him. Check the warehouse transfers from March through July. He looked. His face changed. Evelyn continued. Then check the European distribution report. He checked. His hands began to tremble. Richard noticed. What is it? The CFO swallowed. She's right. Nobody spoke. The CFO looked again. She's completely right. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Richard looked at Evelyn differently. Not with respect. Not yet. With confusion. Where did you learn this? My father. What was he? An accountant. Where did he work? Evelyn looked down. Here. Richard froze. Here. Evelyn nodded. He worked for your father. The room went silent again. Richard's father had founded Blackwell Meridian 42 years earlier. He had died before Richard became CEO. Richard rarely spoke about him. What was his name? Richard asked. Samuel Carter. Richard's face changed. For the first time that morning, Evelyn saw something other than arrogance. She saw recognition. My father knew Samuel. He did. What happened to him? Evelyn took a slow breath. He was fired. Richard frowned. Why? He found an accounting discrepancy. The CFO looked uncomfortable. Richard stared at Evelyn. What kind of discrepancy? The same kind you just asked me to prove. Richard stood. Are you saying my father fired your father for finding this? I'm saying my father discovered a problem, reported it, and was told to stop asking questions. Richard looked toward the CFO. The CFO looked away. Evelyn closed the box. I didn't come here to embarrass you. Richard's voice was quieter now. Then why did you come? Because 14 years ago, I learned what happens when people stay silent because speaking costs too much. She picked up the box. I didn't want to watch it happen again. Then she walked out. Nobody stopped her. But Richard didn't forget her. The next morning, Evelyn arrived at 5:30 like always. She expected nothing to change. But when she reached the executive floor, she found Richard standing outside the elevator. He was alone. You were right, he said. Evelyn looked at him. I know. Richard almost smiled. You always talk like that. Only when the numbers agree with me. For the first time in years, Richard laughed. But the conversation wasn't finished. Over the following weeks, Evelyn was invited into meetings. At first, executives resisted. They questioned her credentials. They asked where she had studied. They wanted to know why she had never mentioned her knowledge before. One executive even told Richard privately that hiring a cleaner into financial strategy would make the company look ridiculous. Evelyn heard about it. She didn't respond. She simply kept working. Every day, she arrived early. Every day, she analyzed another problem. Every day, she uncovered something else. A supplier contract that was costing the company millions. A distribution route that could be redesigned. A production agreement with hidden penalties. An employee retention problem nobody wanted to discuss. Evelyn didn't demand a promotion. She didn't ask for a corner office. She didn't even ask people to call her by a new title. She simply solved problems. And slowly, something strange happened. People began coming to her. Young analysts. Managers. Accountants. Even executives. They would knock on the door and say, "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn always said yes. But one person remained suspicious. Richard. He couldn't understand her. Most ambitious people wanted something. Money. Power. Recognition. Evelyn seemed to want none of it. One evening, he found her alone in a conference room. She was staring at an old photograph. Richard recognized the man immediately. Samuel Carter. His father's accountant. My father respected him, Richard said. Evelyn looked up. Your father respected him until he disagreed with him. Richard sat down. What happened? Evelyn was quiet for several seconds. Then she told him. Samuel had discovered that one of Blackwell Meridian's largest contracts was hiding losses. He warned Richard's father. His father told him to keep quiet. Samuel refused. 3 days later, he was fired. His professional reputation was destroyed. Other companies refused to hire him. He spent the next years doing small accounting jobs from home. Then came the illness. Then the medical bills. Then the house was sold. Evelyn's voice remained steady. But her hands weren't. Richard noticed. I'm sorry, he said. Evelyn shook her head. You didn't do it. No. He paused, but I benefited from it. That was the first time Evelyn looked directly at him. Richard continued. I spent my whole life believing my father built this company by being ruthless. He looked at the photograph. Maybe he did. He swallowed. But I never asked what it cost other people. Evelyn said nothing. Richard looked at her. Why did you become a cleaner? The question surprised her. She looked toward the window. Because after my father died, I didn't know who I was anymore. Richard waited. I had spent my entire life believing intelligence would protect us, Evelyn said. Then I watched my father lose everything because he told the truth. Her eyes filled with tears. I started believing that being invisible was safer. Richard didn't interrupt. Evelyn continued. I could have spent 14 years hating this company. She touched the photograph. But my father never taught me to hate people. She smiled faintly. He taught me to understand systems. Richard lowered his eyes. And you understood ours. Eventually. No, he said. You understood it before all of us. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Richard asked the question nobody had asked her in 14 years. What do you want? Evelyn looked at him. I want my father's name cleared. Richard nodded. Anything else? She shook her head. That's all. But Richard knew it wasn't. Not because Evelyn wanted more. Because she deserved more. The man looked at her. How do you know? Because he taught me something. What? Evelyn smiled through her tears. Truth isn't supposed to become a prison. 3 months later, Blackwell Meridian held its annual leadership conference. Hundreds of employees filled the main auditorium. Executives sat in the front. Managers filled the middle rows. Support staff stood along the sides. Nobody expected anything unusual. Then Richard walked onto the stage. He spoke about the company's history. Its successes. Its failures. Its future. Then he stopped. I've spent much of my career believing leadership means being the person everyone listens to. He looked toward the back of the room. But I recently learned that leadership can also mean listening to the person nobody notices. The room became quiet. Richard continued. There is a woman in this company who worked here for 14 years without receiving the recognition she deserved. Heads turned. Evelyn stood near the back. She didn't know what was happening. Richard smiled. Evelyn Carter, would you please come forward? The room erupted in applause. Evelyn didn't move. For a moment, she seemed almost embarrassed. Then an older employee beside her whispered, "Go." She walked toward the stage. Richard handed her a microphone. I want to publicly acknowledge something, he said. 14 years ago, Evelyn's father, Samuel Carter, discovered financial misconduct inside this company. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Instead of protecting him, this company failed him. Richard paused. And my family benefited from that failure. Evelyn looked down. Richard continued. Today, Blackwell Meridian is formally clearing Samuel Carter's name. The applause grew louder. But Richard wasn't finished. He announced the creation of a new internal ethics division. He announced that Evelyn would lead it. Then he said something nobody expected. She will also receive ownership in the company. Evelyn shook her head. No. The room went quiet. Richard smiled. You haven't heard the amount. I don't need to. A few people laughed softly. Evelyn looked at him. I don't want payment for what my father lost. Richard asked, then what do you want? Evelyn looked at the hundreds of employees watching her. I want no one else to lose everything because they were brave enough to tell the truth. The auditorium became silent. That was the moment everyone understood. Evelyn hadn't spent 14 years waiting for revenge. She had spent 14 years preparing to make sure someone else wouldn't have to. But the most emotional moment came after the ceremony. Evelyn was standing alone backstage when an elderly man approached her. She didn't recognize him at first. Then she did. He had worked alongside her father. He had been one of the accountants who knew what happened. I should have spoken up, he whispered. Evelyn looked at him. I was afraid. She nodded. So was my father. The man began crying. I've carried that guilt for 40 years. Evelyn reached for his hand. My father wouldn't want you to carry it forever. The man looked at her. How do you know? Because he taught me something. What? Evelyn smiled through her tears. Truth isn't supposed to become a prison.
That night, Evelyn returned to the small apartment, where she had lived for years. She opened an old drawer. Inside was a photograph of her father. Beside it was an envelope. The envelope contained the original document he had written before he died. Evelyn had never opened it. She finally did. There were only a few lines. Her father's handwriting was uneven. If you're reading this, Evelyn, then I probably didn't get to see the woman you became. She covered her mouth. But I know you. Her tears began falling. I know you will spend too much of your life trying to prove that you're good enough. She closed her eyes. You don't have to. The room was completely silent. Then she read the final sentence. Never become smaller because someone else is uncomfortable with your light. Evelyn held the letter against her chest. For 14 years, she had believed her silence was weakness. She finally understood that it had never been. Her silence had been survival. Her patience had been preparation. And her quietness had never meant she lacked power. It meant she had learned not to waste power on people who didn't deserve it.
The next morning, Evelyn walked into Blackwell Meridian through the same front doors she had entered thousands of times before. But this time, nobody ignored her. Employees stopped to greet her. Analysts asked for her advice. Executives waited for her opinion. The woman who had once pushed a cleaning cart through the corridors was now walking toward an office overlooking the entire city. But when she reached the door, she stopped. She looked back at the hallway. At the place where she had once been invisible. And smiled. Because she realized something. The best revenge had never been making them regret underestimating her. It was becoming so comfortable with her own worth that their opinion no longer mattered. And perhaps that is the truth about people like Evelyn. The world often mistakes quietness for weakness. It mistakes humility for ignorance. It mistakes kindness for surrender. But sometimes the quietest person in the room is simply the one who has been listening the longest. Sometimes the person carrying the trash knows more about the company than the person sitting in the corner office. Sometimes the employee everyone ignores is carrying a story nobody bothered to ask about. And sometimes the woman they call ordinary is simply extraordinary without needing anyone's permission to prove it. If this story touched something inside you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Silent Empire, and share this story with someone who has ever been underestimated. And I want to ask you one question. Have you ever been treated as though you were less capable, less intelligent, or less important simply because someone didn't understand your value? Tell us your story in the comments. Because someone reading your words tonight may be going through the exact same thing. They may be sitting quietly in a workplace where nobody sees them. They may be carrying responsibilities nobody knows about. They may be wondering whether their silence means they have lost. Remind them that it doesn't. Because Evelyn Carter's story teaches us something that success alone never could. You don't always have to announce your strength. You don't have to fight every insult. You don't have to prove yourself to every arrogant person who doubts you. Sometimes, you simply keep learning. You keep building. You keep showing up. And you let time reveal what arrogance refused to see. Evelyn didn't become powerful the day Richard gave her a title. She was powerful long before anyone knew her name. The title simply gave everyone else permission to finally notice. And perhaps the deepest lesson is this: never measure a person's worth by the position they hold today. The woman cleaning the office might have once designed the system running the entire building. The man delivering packages might have a story of sacrifice nobody knows. The quiet employee in the back of the room might be the only person brave enough to tell the truth. We are all carrying stories beneath the surface, and sometimes, the greatest mistake a person can make is assuming they already know someone simply because of where that person stands. Evelyn spent 14 years being overlooked. But those 14 years weren't wasted. They taught her patience. They taught her observation. They taught her resilience. And most importantly, they taught her that her worth didn't begin when other people finally recognized it. Her worth had been there all along. The world just took 14 years to catch up. So if you're currently being underestimated, remember Evelyn. Don't let someone else's arrogance become the measurement of your potential. Keep building. Keep learning. Keep your dignity. And when the moment finally comes, don't waste it proving that they were wrong. Use it to prove to yourself that you were never what they thought you were. You were always more. And sometimes, the most powerful empire a person can build, is the one nobody sees coming.